Max, how long have you been performing with students like the kind of gig that you're doing today?
Well, it's what, 5 o'clock, I'd say? No, I've been doing this for quite a long time, really on my own. I guess since about 1986, I've performed with student groups. Of course, I've been performing with student groups my whole life in a sense, but in colleges and high schools, even junior high schools, I guess for about 24, 25 years. And with the full-time schedule that I had in recent years, it was difficult to get out. School was out on the weekends, and I was busy during the week, but I managed to do quite a few, and today particularly, with cutbacks in funding for arts programs and people wondering what their next step is, I find that it's particularly important for people who've been around a long time, as I have. I'll be 60 in April, to kind of instruct the next generation and the next generation after this generation that arts are important, particularly in my field, music.
What is it that you get out of these kind of performances, may I ask?
I get a tremendous charge out of it. I'm sure I get more than they do in a lot of ways. It's particularly rewarding for me to perform with young students. I noticed that I did a concert last week in Palm Springs to benefit the Palm Springs High School Music Program, and it was very well attended. And you know, for me, it's really a kick to see these people rise, the young people rise to the occasion of playing music with someone they've never played with before. Take my direction, play my charts, and in some cases we sort of split it. And you know, I have both my children are musicians. My son's a professional drummer, and it's great to see the youth today, particularly with all the distractions that young people have. When I came up in the 50s, there weren't that many distractions. Today, there's so many distractions. It's great to see young people delve into the mysteries of playing an instrument, solve those mysteries, only to be confronted by more mysteries, and to keep digging and digging and digging. And you know, sooner rather than later, you become pretty good at doing that. And that's what comes out when I play with these students is their willingness to learn, their embracing of the challenge of playing with someone they might have seen on TV or in a concert. And you know, when you're playing music and it really works, and they pick up those cues that you're throwing out, it's a marvelous feeling.
Nice.
How do you decide
Yes.
what music you're going to play? Is it kind of you tell them what to do, or?
How do I decide what music to play? Well, I get together with the music director, in this case Aaron Vaughn, about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, to determine what they'd like to play and what I'd like to play and what I'd like to bring along to perhaps gently challenge them to playing. And so there's always a combination of music that they know and that they have performed in the past, and music that I will give them charts weeks in advance that they can, you know, bone up on, and then when it all comes together in rehearsal. So it's really a collaborative effort. The idea, in my view, is for the students to have a positive experience and not to be worried or anxious about what might be presented to them. And for example, during the rehearsal today, the band, the musicians in the band, fielded everything that I threw at them wonderfully well. I mean, you know, they're well on their way, if they choose, to having careers in music. And I know that most of them are in the music program here. And so, you know, it's really, it's like a game of catch, you know, and that's under the best circumstances. Is, you know, I throw the ball, they catch it, they throw the ball back at me, and I try to catch it. I'm a little older, so sometimes I don't always catch it. I always try to catch it. Yeah.
Mr. Weinberg, Thomas Mulready from CoolCleveland.
Hi,
We spoke
yeah.
a few weeks ago.
Yes, we did.
This is my son, Max Mulready.
Hi, how are you?
He's a
Good to
musician
see you.
as well. How did you warm up, and what kind of routines did you go through? Did you use rudiments, where you know, because you played so many gigs, you're backstage, you're warming up to go out and play a lot of different types of gigs as well. You were doing rock, you're doing jazz, you're doing all types of things. How do you have a routine that you use to keep yourself in shape with the drums?
Yeah, well, you know, my son, who's a professional drummer now, says, yeah, well, my dad took lessons and studied when he was a kid, but not enough to hurt his playing, which I always thought was a clever observation. No, I came up, as I said, in the 50s and 60s, and I took drum lessons once a week, and, you know, practicing was really hard. And I actually can, at the age of almost 60, I'll be 60 in April, I can remember back to when I didn't know how to play the drums and had to struggle with just the most simplest things. So for me, it was a case of working at the rudiments, much as the same as these young people here today, you know, just sitting in your room and playing to records, playing to, you know, reading music and playing, of course that's drum music, it's a little different. I probably am the only band leader on a major network TV show in the history of television who doesn't know how to read music. But I have good ears.
But you read the charts, right?
I can read charts.
Yeah.
But I can't read the notes. I can read the rhythms.
Right.
But I have good ears. And if your name is on the bass drum, they have to listen to you. So, but warming up, yeah, it's very important to warm up because it's like anything, you know, you don't want to go, particularly as you get older, you don't want to just go out and run a race, you have to warm up. Same thing with drumming, I warm up on a practice pad. Depending on the type of music I'm playing or the type of engagement that I'll be performing in, it varies a little bit. Some demand more strenuous workouts. Particularly playing with Bruce and the E Street Band, I have to get my heart rate up, you know, and so there's certainly loosening the hands, but it's also getting the whole body ready to put yourself through that 4-hour grinder every night.
You know, you were known for your straight time. I think that's what you brought to the E Street Band. You outlasted 60 other drummers for the audition, and the difference between those first two albums and the Born to Run album when you came in was that real steady Mighty Max beat. Was that something that you were born with, or did you really have to work on that? And is there a way for a drummer to work on that if it's not inborn?
Yeah, actually, I don't think I was born with that. I was born with a great passion for music. I loved music as a little boy, channeled it into the drums, but it came keeping very strict time, particularly in the age where before click tracks and metronomes, and where other musicians had to learn that it's not just the drummer's responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility. Because the drummer is like the goalie on a hockey team, always gets blamed. And that didn't come naturally to me, but I always had a lot of excitement in my drumming, but not a lot of finesse and control. So I did work at it. I worked very strenuously in my 30s, late 20s and 30s, to develop the ability to, no matter what's going on around me, always hear a quarter note in my head. And I did that by playing with a metronome click track every day for hours. And you learn that the time, and if musicians know this, but for the uninitiated, time is the space between the notes. And if you rush it, then you lose the time. So the function of a drummer is not necessarily to do a drum solo, but is to keep, in a rock group particularly, or any group, is to keep time. And it takes a bit of doing to get the confidence to be able to, by example, show everybody where the time is. And in the case of playing with people who don't necessarily lock in with the drummer, my attitude is, well, I'm here, I'll be here when you get back. If you want to jump on the beat with the rest of us, you can do that, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here. And that's what the drummers that I always admired are able to do. I think probably in rock drumming, maybe one of the best exponents of that is Charlie Watts with the Rolling Stones, who no matter what else is going around him, he's just straight ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Weinberg, one of the things that's happening in Stark County, and you spoke a little bit to this earlier, there's an arts revival that's happening in Stark County, and you talked about fighting to save music. Why is fine arts and music something worth fighting for?
Well, fine arts and music, particularly at the college level, is worth fighting for because I think there should be more lawyers, engineers, businessmen who have read a Shakespeare play, who have listened to Mozart or the Ramones, and appreciated why it's a deep culture that we have created here in America and around the world, but certain things like jazz are particularly American. And, both arts and arts education and arts presentation are the first things that seem to go. I became aware of this about 8 years ago. I was asked by my high school that I graduated from in 1969, where they had cut the music program, and the parents of the music students got together and they funded the program themselves. And they approached me to do a benefit about 8 years ago in my hometown to raise funds so they could buy music and they could buy drum heads and strings and things like that. And and this was before this terrible recession hit us. So now it's even worse. And now you hear, and I'll address this in my remarks tonight, but you hear of these disastrous plans by certain members of our government to eliminate the funding for PBS, public broadcasting, National Endowment for the Arts. And when you start looking at that, which for young people is so important, because music not only teaches you, if you're a musician, that you'll never be alone. You can always play music. It teaches you great discipline. And that can be applied to any area of your life. If you sit by yourself at a time when you don't know how to play an instrument, and then you suddenly work at it, you're exposed to it, you find the beauty in the music, and you have taught yourself, even with instruction, but you've taught yourself to stick with it and learn how to play an instrument, that's a great life lesson. But I think the arts in general are as crucial as math and science and anything else. I think it was one of the reasons why my generation responded so strongly to the Kennedy administration, who it seemed at the time, and I was in 7th grade, every weekend they would have, or during the week, they would have an arts program at the White House. I'm sure more than any other president before or since. And current administration's doing a good job with that. They had a wonderful program the other day on the history of Motown. But if our leaders recognize that, eliminating these programs in high school, in college, and for the general population on public broadcasting, for example, where you see stuff that you won't see on any other of the 10,000 channels that are out there. That's why I think it's important. I hope that answered your question.
Oh, it did. Thank you very much.
I was wondering how I could gracefully bring this up, and since you brought it up, I'm with the WKSU, the NPR station at Kent State.
Yeah.
So would you include NPR in as well with your comments about PBS in terms of funding for public broadcasting?
Yeah, it would absolutely include National Public Radio, which my wife and I are devoted listeners of. And there is this obvious disconnect between more radical parts of our government who look at these type programs as something of a liberal agenda from the past. And I think that's wrong. I think these are absolutely necessary to a progressive country, to people who are looking with an appreciation to the past, but with hope toward the future. These are areas, NPR, NEA, PBS, where it's the most experimental radio, television, and funding for the arts that have existed in our country for 50, 60 years. So to throw them in with, cuts that are occurring at every level of government as something that's expendable, I think is a mistake. Because, if you can get a child hooked on the arts early and free thinking and not doctrine, but open forums like NPR for people of goodwill to sit around and have disagreements agreeably, that sets a great template for the future.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions we have?
Bruce was at the Rock Hall yesterday. Did
At
you hear
the
about
Rock and
that?
Roll Hall of Fame? No,
Yeah.
I did.
He came in at about 4:30. The Springsteen exhibit closed for the final day yesterday.
We came to get his stuff back.
All those notebooks.
Yeah, he wants to make sure he gets
Yeah, he's a big notebook. Had you had a chance to see that exhibit, Max?
I hadn't, and I haven't been. We played Cleveland in our last tour, and we always play Cleveland. We always play this area. This is probably the most supportive part of the country that we do play in Ohio particularly. Forget it. If you ask anybody in the East Street Band, we had a group of guys following us around for years called the Cleveland Boys, and they still come.
Yep.
Those of them are still around, and we've had some of our most memorable nights in the Cleveland area, this part of Ohio, whether it was '78 at the Ridgefield Coliseum or earlier that year at the Agora, which was the Agora Club, which is no longer there, but if you remember, that was the place to play. We had a great, there's a great bootleg out on that, and it was a wonderful night for us. So the support that this part of the country has shown us for nearly 40 years is something we really appreciate. I haven't been to the Rock Hall to see that exhibit, but on the other hand, I was there when that exhibit was being created, so I guess I know what was there.
Yes, Mr. Weinberg?
Yeah.
I just had a question about what is your advice for the students that you work with that wish to pursue a career in music?
My advice for the students, particularly today that I work with, and students in general, in whatever they're interested in, whether it's music or anything else, is to find out as much as you can about how you fit into the world around you in that field. Music, for example, play everywhere. Listen to all types of music. Today, particularly, there are no guarantees for either a job or long-term longevity in any field. So why not be a musician? One of the things musicians do, which is, I think, one of the most important aspects of being a musician, is you are actually spreading love every time you play. That's the purpose of your music. And I'll talk later about this, but there's a great expression, we're going to see so-and-so in concert. You ever think of what that means, being in concert? And most people, I think, perception of that phrase is, so-and-so band in concert tonight. Well, actually, if you think about it, it's more about the audience and the performer being in concert together, coming together. And that's not an original thought of mine, but it's something that I've become aware of as I've gotten older, actually, because if the audience shows up and you show up, and you all pay attention to that third element in the room, which is the magic of the experience, great things can happen. I also tell young performers, and I did mention it today, that everyone out there watching you wants to be doing what you're doing, but you're doing it. And you may lose sight of how special it is because you do it all the time and you're taking lessons and you're practicing, plus you have a full workload at school. So maybe you lose sight of how unique you are in learning how to play an instrument. I meet people my age all the time who are not in the music field or don't play their instruments, the ones they learned as a child, and say to me, gee, I wish I'd kept up with the piano or the guitar or the trumpet, just even as a sideline. Because one of my favorite expressions of Bruce's is if you play the guitar, you'll never be alone. You always have something to hang out with. And you never know what comes out of that. So I'm hesitant to give advice necessarily because everybody has to find their own way. But the things that have helped me is to keep your ears open, your eyes open to opportunities, listen to all kinds of music. Don't be a specialist. Don't say to yourself, well, I'm not going to listen to that guy or that woman, or I don't like that kind of music. Listen to it all because you never know. In my case, the last thing I ever thought I would do would be to play behind Tony Bennett. And it was a good thing that when I was a kid, I listened to Tony Bennett records because Tony Bennett asked me to back him up on television, suddenly. And had I not had the broad range of experience as a drummer and as a musician, I might have said, wow, I don't know if I'm up to that. But if you play with a lot of different people and you play all sorts of jobs and this and that, you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish on your instrument.
Thank you.
And, you know, some of my remarks tonight are addressed to these subjects. And I tell a story of my son who's now on tour with a great punk band called Against Me. And he's 20 years old. He's an incredible drummer, really amazing drummer. And they're, you know, traveling around the country in a van and occasionally flying around. But he's, you know, I think he's in Chicago tonight. And having the time of his life. It's exactly what he wants to be doing right now. And, you know, as a parent, that to me is very rewarding because he's doing what he wants to be doing. And you know, he actually has more of an income as a drummer than I do at the moment. But that's okay. That's what he should be doing. You always want your children to do better. And I think frankly, I think he's far ahead of where I was when I was 20. So.
Talk about the record industry and the music industry in general. It's changing pretty dramatically. It's more difficult maybe for some musicians to make a living. The record industry in particular is sort of dissolving before our eyes. What are your thoughts on how, you know, the internet has changed things, or what it's like to kind of come up these days when it might be a little more difficult?
Yeah. Well, contrary to a general belief, I don't necessarily think that the either promotion or representation or presentation of music is in danger. I'll tell you why. What's happened, as I see it, is the music business, which has contracted because it had so expanded, contracted to a more natural level that's a little bit reminiscent of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, in that the consumer is much more attuned to the value, which is why it's reverted back to a singles business. Singles meaning 45s. Singles meaning when Ahmet Ertegun and his partner started Atlantic Records, they would drive down south with these rhythm and blues records and sell them out of the trunk of their cars. That's where the record business, the music, the selling, exploitation, and capitalizing on recorded music is going. It's not in the back of your car, it's on your computer. The business obviously was very slow to recognize the impact of technology, much in the same way Detroit in the 70s was. They're dealing with it slowly, and you know, iTunes is an example of that. But we've gone from an album-oriented consumer base to a singles consumer base, which I think is a positive movement. The model of there are very few artists, relatively speaking, who do an album of material, 12 to 14 songs, where those 12 to 14 songs are a unified statement and they're all great songs. That was a concept started by Frank Sinatra and Jackie Gleason, by the way, in the early 50s, of the so-called concept record, where, you know, told a story and rather than just a collection of singles. Well, it was like that through the 80s, and with the advent of computers, it became, you know, on a 12-song album, 2 singles and 10 filler songs, which there was a lot of in the 50s as well. So I think the chaff has kind of been separated from the wheat. But I know in the case of my son, they get their music out there, whether it's downloads, whether kids today, I say kids, young people today are extraordinarily resilient and creative in getting their art, whether it's music or graphic arts or whatever impulse and passions they have, out to the public. And they figure out a way to do it. And anybody who says that rock and roll, for example, is dead, has never lived with a 16-year-old kid. Because I can tell you that rock and roll as a subject, as an object, is not dead. It sounds different than it did 30 years ago. It's certainly not dead. There are kids all over the country playing instruments, more so than when I was 15 and a teenager. You know, there are less opportunities, unfortunately, but, you know, there aren't as many clubs, there aren't as many bars, there aren't as many places to play. There is a you know, disastrous trend where bands have to actually pay to play in places, and my son's been involved in that just to play. And he figured out a way around it. We had an old barn on our property, and he fixed it up, and instead of going out and paying club owners to play at their places, he set up in the barn and had people come to him when he was in high school. So it was very creative, and he made some money doing it, actually. So, you know, where there's a will, there's a way, and I think with respect to music, there is such a desire to get it out there. It'll find its way out. You got to be much more creative. And if you can, what I tell young people is if you can play live, you know, if you can really become a performer or play live, that is what will lead to longevity. You can't, because if you have to depend on record sales, those glory days are pretty much gone in terms of humongous record sales. I read a statistic about a month ago that in the beginning of the 90s, to have the #1 record on the Billboard charts, #1 album, you needed to sell 1.5 million albums to get to #1. A month ago, and I forget who the artist was, but a month ago, that artist sold 40,000 albums and was the #1 selling record of that week. That's an indication of where album sales are going, you know. And I vigorously oppose the idea of free music because it's in the airwaves. It's not free. Somebody had to create it. It's like anything else. That's why we have copyright laws. So, you know, there were no free downloads in my house when my kids were growing up. They understood the concept. And, you know, I think in the future you'll be seeing more creative ways, both for artists to get their art out there and for record companies and studios and networks to be able to market those efforts and distribute them and make money for everybody.
We have time for one final question.
If no one else, I don't want to monopolize here, but I got to know, there are rumors of a 2012 Springsteen tour. Know anything about that?
Yeah, I've seen those. They're rumors.
Oh, okay.
You know, I wouldn't say that would be out of the realm of possibility, but honestly, with Bruce and the E Street Band tours, they are so casually put together in terms of, you want to play? You want to play? That's how it comes down. We are, if you're familiar with the Broadway musical and the movie starring Gene Kelly of Brigadoon, the story is of this mythical Scottish town that appears every 100 years. I always describe the E Street Band like that because it's in the air. I was with Clarence in Florida 2 days ago, and we had dinner, and you know, you can feel. I've been playing with Bruce a little bit myself lately at clubs locally. You know, you kind of feel it. There's a trend, you know, but really, nothing is planned. It's you know, it just sort of. Yeah, he gets an idea for, with respect to the E Street Band, he gets an idea for a band record. And we're not recording anything currently. And when he gets that idea, and then he writes some songs, and he writes some more songs, and if it adds up to an album, then you have an album. And well, maybe you have an album that you can tour behind. So that's about the most planning, you know. But we are a group of individuals that when literally you get a phone call from Bruce, you're there the next day. And during the years that I performed on television, we had to be a little more planning about it, but not too much more. You know, it was really that casual. I got some songs, let's go into the studio. It's been like that from day one, and my day one was August 23rd, 1974. But who's counting? Well, thank you for coming down here today. I hope you've enjoyed. I've enjoyed this.
Thanks so much.
Questions were great. My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hope I've been able to give you some enlightenment. If you're around tonight, I think you'll enjoy the music. You already heard what we did.
You bet.
That was fun.
It was
good.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, we got some clever arrangements out of there, and they've got some more songs in their book. And as I said, what I do is I go around the country and I pick out the next generation of people that I'm going to hire. And they're in college right now, so, you know, you never know when I'm auditioning you. See you later, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you.